All right, we're live. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Getting to Hell Yes with Michael Patton from Fetch. Really excited to have this conversation. We had Jay, no, yeah, from Fetch earlier, the chief storyteller, which is exciting. Actually, I actually took some tips away from that one from a storytelling perspective and tuned a little bit. So exciting to hear from what you got to say. Now, for everyone listening today, just remembering or reminding everybody on the Getting to Hell Yes premise, what we're seeking to kind of uncover, reveal through conversations with executives that have been in sales positions, internal and external, is really the match of problem and solution, how to find that the buyer who is in a hell yes position, those that are seeking to find solutions for the problems that they articulate themselves. And kind of one of the challenges we have as sellers is to match up what we sell with what the buyers are looking to solve for. And then the real tough part is match the timing of when they're trying to solve that when we reach out to them. Because we don't want to, trying to get someone to do something that they don't want to do is really inefficient use of everybody's time. So that's part of the nature of this conversation. Brought to you by IRCX. We're AI remote maintenance software for property management. So see it, solve it, close it is our tagline. If you're frustrated with triage or frustrated with trips, we solve that problem. And as we go through this session today with Michael, if you've got any questions along the way, please jump on and throw them in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to them throughout. And as always, Michael, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you getting to hear your story. Fascinating story from where you guys are at. 500 employees plus, all over the U.S. Absolutely kicking ass. Tell us a little bit of your background and how you end up in this role. I'm sure that's a good story given your Minnesota background. And then, and ultimately, what's the problem you guys solved at Fetch?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. I've watched a few of these, really enjoy it. So looking forward to it. But yeah, my name's Michael Patton. I started Fetch in 2016. So definitely not a direct path to starting Fetch. Didn't have any experience or background in multifamily or logistics. So I'll get to that. But I grew up in Nashville area.
Oh, Nashville.
Through high school. All my extended family was in Minnesota. So I'd kind of only gone up there in the summers, which was ultimately a bit of a mistake once I experienced the first winter. But went up there originally to walk onto the baseball team. So that was part of the reason why I went to Minnesota. Went to school at University of Minnesota. Finance degree, didn't really know what I wanted to do out of school, just something business. So finance degree made the most sense. Worked at United Health Group for a couple years out of school, like corporate FP&A, sitting in a cubicle, doing like quarterly earnings reports, and very quickly realized that was not going to be a long-term career path for me. A little bit more of a problem with authority. Maybe it's a little bit too harsh, but a bit more free-spirited than doing that job all day. And then what brought me to Dallas originally, where I started Fetch. I was looking to move back south because it was one of the polar vortex winters, and I just had enough of the cold. That didn't have an idea to start a business in Minneapolis or at the time, but moved to Dallas for a pricing role at Constellation Brands. So I was pricing Corona and Modelo beer, which was certainly more interesting than United Health Group, but was still really intentionally and actively looking for something to start. I was 25 when I moved to Dallas, and definitely risk on. And so the kind of, I guess, luck of part of the initial journey, I moved to a big property in Uptown Dallas, almost 600 units. They had a big package problem. You had a lot of SMU grads and millennials living in that building, and luckily it took a little while. We service that building now at Fetch, but they were getting 250, 300 packages a day at that property. And so It was, had a couple of my packages lost in the shuffle, more so saw how many, or just how much money they were spending on dealing with packages. And it still wasn't a great experience. They had, I think it was probably 750 square feet, if not more, of very valuable real estate just for a package room. And then they had 2 full-time people having to work it. So that's what initially got the wheels turning. It started to go around to other apartment buildings, and at the time and still now, and I know we'll get to this, but the package locker systems were certainly taking off at the time. And that was really the only game in town to get your on-site teams out of dealing with packages all day. And so the initial premise that really at its core hasn't changed too much. We were the first, still the only off-site package solution. So, my main point originally, and still kind of, I would say our main value prop is that there's never going to be enough space in these buildings for all the packages that they're getting. Package volume is only going up. And so how are you going to solve that problem? One, today, but two, permanently, to get your on-site teams just completely out of the package business. And so we are really kind of last mile for apartment buildings. We stand up our own warehouses in our markets, sign up full buildings, and really outsource the entire process from there. So we'll sign up a building, sort of a building-wide fee, building-wide policy. All the packages come to our warehouse directly, and then we coordinate with residents through our resident-facing app, and we send our teams of delivery partners to the properties, and they go direct to the door during a window that the resident chooses. So totally bypasses the front office from having to deal with boxes, sort of once and for all, and provides a more convenient and reliable amenity for residents.
Well, and previously, like the package, like those two people that were managing those 600 packages that were coming in your first building, like they can't charge for that. Like there's no amenity fee for that. That's just staffing.
Right. I mean, it's really just overhead, and even not direct to your question, but for lockers or rooms, like anything on site, I think the resident perception is that, this is like a gym, it's like a pool, maybe it can further justify an amenity fee of sorts, but generally, there's not a true value add for that. It's just something of an expectation from residents. Yeah.
And so, you're sitting there, a couple people, let's say you're paying them $25 an hour, maybe even $20 an hour, that's $50K a year. Like that's going to be, that's a measurable impact on NOI and ultimately asset value that
right.
Nobody chooses a building because of its, like, well, I'll say not yet. No one then chose a building because of the package amenity because they manage your mail. Right. And so consequently it's like undifferentiated, costs you money, not your core business. Like there's no business doing that at all.
Yeah. I think not your core business is what I would, double click on, because we probably say this less now, but do you want your front office to become a glorified UPS store? Like, is that what your teams and your real estate is the best use? And, certainly think the answer is no.
Well, especially if you look at we do a lot of browsing Yelp reviews, looking for people to prospect on. And like you get across some of the Yelp reviews that they are like, they lost my package, and people are furious about it, and they go to Yelp about it. Like if it's not your core business and it can be an anchor on your review status, you got to figure that out.
Yeah. I mean, I think the packages are very sensitive topics for everybody. It could be just a normal Amazon box, but it also could be a gift from your grandmother. And so it's very emotional in a lot of ways. And, one or two sort of issues on that side can really lead to a big problem, which, we've certainly had to spend a lot of time making sure that our process is as flawless as it can be. And we spend a lot of money and time and resources on customer support for that same reason.
Yeah.
We see, one package question can all of a sudden turn into 30 minutes or an hour that, if you don't have fetch, that's going to be, potentially a property manager, assistant manager, leasing agent spending that much time on looking into what may have happened. And all those things really snowball into even more cost that you're effectively spending on packages, whether you know it or not.
So given you guys have now the warehouse infrastructure, the app infrastructure, the logistics, infrastructure all set up, that's, the established company and kind of what we know and feel like today. What was like the first month like? Month one of Fetch. Someone bought. Now what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Well, even before that, when I thought somebody was going to buy, and this was part of me not knowing multifamily and knowing that, there are plenty of people out there that will make a verbal commitment and then not actually follow through with signing a contract, for better or worse, but it happens. And I I had first commitment from, as a free pilot. I was just trying to get anybody to give me a chance and then start to prove it out and go from there. And so I thought I had the first property on the hook. And I started the company in May. Really took, I would say, like 3-4 months to set everything up, kind of plan it out to what I thought was a detailed degree at the time. And thought I had the first one on the hook in I think it was October of 2016, and went ahead and signed a warehouse lease in the design district of Dallas. That one ended up falling through. So I just had an empty warehouse sitting there for, I guess it was 3 months, which felt like 3 years at the time.
Yeah.
But then for, first pilot, we didn't have any tech, material tech built out. We had some notifications and had, a very scrappy website for scheduling. But we were writing package IDs with Sharpies. And, I delivered packages for the first year and a half. And until we really raised our proper institutional seed round. And so we had a small, very small core team of me, and then somewhat shortly 3 people, and then a few 1099s. But we kind of work during the day, take a break for the 12 to 2 p.m. delivery window, go deliver packages, come back, and then work until 5, deliver 5 to 11 p.m. And that persisted for well over a year, just to prove it out. Didn't have the money to just pay other people to deliver packages. So it was obviously a great, learning experience, and knowing kind of the ins and outs of every part of the operation to then scale it. But it was very bootstrapped for the first year and a half.
I guess the unsuspecting benefit of being a logistics company is that you can't get distracted by being out of region. It's like, it's just you. Right?
Yeah.
Like, did you do Arlington, Fort Worth, or did you just do Dallas?
We just did Dallas, the original Dallas warehouse, to cover kind of, core Dallas uptown, I think up to 635. That was probably for a little over a year. And so it was just that one warehouse. We got our first, I believe, like 5 or 6 properties in the first sort of year.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of the bigger groups to give us first pilot in that year. So, but yeah, it was, we had basically 3 employees by the end of that year, and a smallish roster of 1099s, but somebody had to be at the warehouse 7 days a week. Somebody had to deliver packages. So there was no going out of town on the weekend or doing anything at all, except for focusing in on Vantage Street in the design district.
Yeah. Did you, like, when you were first talking to those original customers, how did you, did they know they had a problem, or were they just kind of doing work?
It was definitely an identified problem at the time. I mean, a little less so than 3, 4, 5 years after that. But, I think Luxor and Package Concierge and Parcel Pending, they had all been in operations and sort of spreading like the package problem message for at least a few years before us. So I would say generally the problem was known. As the years passed, like certainly up until COVID, where it was a tipping point, but varying degrees of opinions on how big of a problem this is. But it was less about, hey, you have a problem. It was more, hey, we're a newer company. We're doing this thing that you've never heard about. Lockers are a safer play, at the time, versus this new startup that's taking packages off site and delivering to the doors. And so that was the real hurdle to overcome.
Yeah. How did you help them? So kind of getting into the, I've got a package problem. Maybe I'm Googling, I'm a regional, or I'm an asset, or maybe I'm a property manager. And I'm Googling, like, how do I solve my package problem? And maybe they're looking up the alternatives, like the package locker businesses, and they're trying to looking around there. How did you attach yourselves to that consideration when they're looking at solving the package problem?
Yeah, I mean, early on, our SEO or any sort of online presence was probably severely lacking, but pretty quickly, if anybody was Googling either package problem or package solution, anything in that vein, plus lockers or rooms, like we made sure we were near the top of the results for that. And then it was really just saying, hey, yeah, do you have a space problem? Do you not want to spend the money on lockers? This is a more of a complete and permanent solution was our positioning now, and frankly, or then and now.
And are you guys able to, like, that first mind shift of, like, I'm looking for solutions and maybe I'm competing, I'm checking prices on the different package locker solutions, or maybe I need to hire somebody, like those are capital investments, and you're not a capital investment. So that's got to be it's a different buyer, right? Like, I assume a property manager could buy Fetch versus, like, if I'm buying a locker, that's got to go upstream to someone who's got a capital budget.
In short, you're right. I think it depends on the situation. And frankly, early on, a lot of our pushback was because they couldn't capitalize it because, I think the problem maybe was not as widespread or had not reached the levels of, VP or, chief development officer or whatever the case may be, where the onsite teams and the regionals knew how big of a problem it was. I would say at the time a lot more than now. In 2016, they knew it was a big problem they had to solve. I think once you got to an asset manager or potentially VPs or C-suite, it was a little bit less of a known issue just because they weren't on site as much as those teams seeing it every day. And so we would get a lot of pushback because an asset manager might want to purchase a locker system, capitalize it over 5 years. If they have the dollars, on a monthly recurring basis, that may make more sense, but then you're not solving the problem as well, in our view.
Yeah.
And so it was early on, just because of the risk or perceived risk of going with us. All of those sales were through, VP and above, I would say, generally for the first probably 20, 25 properties even.
Really?
Because if you're a on-site manager or regional at the time, the lockers are the known solution.
Yeah, it's a safe buy.
Me as an on-site team member, I'm not taking a risk if I go with the known and sort of approved solution. Whereas if you go with Fetch as an early stage company, that might fall back on me. So that was a lot of what we had to overcome in the early days, just to prove it out and really ease any fears that, hey, here's how this whole process is going to work.
Yeah.
You have very early on, like, you have my phone number, call me if anything happens.
Yeah.
A lot of it was just building trust, one-on-one relationship wise with VPs and above. And they would, after a few conversations, I think have enough trust, at least in me, frankly, to give us a shot. And then we'd launch and be able to prove it and kind of build the snowball from there within that company.
Did you do a lot of time, like a lot of sales decks fail to acknowledge the alternatives that might exist in the market? Like, given that the pre-existing go-to, the safe buy is the package locker, did you find that you have to articulate how that doesn't really solve the problem? Like how did you kind of pull that acknowledgement that a package locker is just a different, like, it's the same problem, just a different shape of the same problem?
I think this part certainly shifted over time. We're in the first 2 or 3 years, we intentionally chose to focus just on, here's your package problem. And we identified most of the problem as sites that were still doing it sort of the legacy way and having their leasing agents logging packages or having on-site team members like truly manually handling packages. In part because at the time, a lot of the locker systems or anything that they would have spent money on or invested in were most likely too recent. And so we just had much lower odds to be able to replace those.
Because the person that made the decision is still like kind of in the sphere of influence of the following decision.
Correct. And in a lot of cases, they may have just spent 50 or 75K, and that's probably not going to be a decision they're going to make to go with us at that point versus a more recent solution or spend for that matter. And then, I think call it 2019, 2020, once a lot of the either companies had used lockers and seen the results with those, or just the purchase or CapEx spend was enough in the rear view where it wasn't as much of a sunk cost. It was a bit more of a blank slate decision, if you will.
Yep.
That's where we started to say, like, here's your problem. Here's how we differentiate versus lockers, and here's as part of the problem in some cases. Here's where lockers are falling short, and we can replace those solutions.
I imagine, like, kind of as you guys hit that arc, like starting 16, you're getting traction, you're getting motion. Package lockers have been in place, and then then like the COVID curve hits, and then all of a sudden these package lockers, like, you're faced with the decision. I might need to make it bigger. Like, I might need to get a bigger package lock. Now I'm investing more square footage. I need to readdress my capital problem. And is this curve of package delivery ever good? Like, can I even guess how big of a package locker do I need?
Right. And that was certainly probably the biggest inflection point if I had to choose one of, one volume inflection at the time was such that if they didn't have capacity issues or varying issues with whatever was on site, they did in spring of 2020 and moving forward.
Yeah.
So that was, probably pushed forward perhaps those situations from happening by a few years. And then, that asset manager especially, or owner, is saying, if they even have space to put more lockers, do we really want to continue to do this, or just realize that we want to pull the plug and go with Fetch? So that was 2020 forward. We had some pretty huge years of growth.
Did you like, as that was arcing upwards, did you kind of start formalizing who is kind of a hell yes buyer? Like, you've got people that now have made a choice. Like, this is like, and sometimes like a customer that, as we keep hearing, a customer that made a choice that didn't work out is a really good prospect.
Mm-hmm.
Because they could have said, hey, we tried this and now we've already outgrown these, we outgrown this already. So we know that that's not going to work. Like, how did you get started on that?
Yeah, I mean, and totally agree with you. One, on as I'll call it between 2020 and even now, but certainly like a 2 or 3 year time frame, sort of in COVID and somewhat coming out of it in those couple of years. That's when more and more people were, everybody had to varying degrees toyed with lockers or gone in big on lockers, and so they knew what they had with those, and so some of our sales points ultimately became true on, hey, we actually did run out of capacity, or these, like, our staff is dealing with packages for 2 or 3 hours a day and we have lockers. And so that taking advantage of that was a big part of it, and going back to a lot of the no's in sales conversations sort of previous to that, I think unlocked some pretty big deals for us in 2020, 2021.
Yeah. It's interesting, like, the whole premise of last mile storage is kind of not new in the grand scheme of things. Like, there's a company in town here called Adabotics that works on, their vertical warehousing. And so there's a lot of, like, this whole things to solve this problem in other markets. And so and we're suffering the same thing, trying to get people to buy into remote maintenance, right? So, hey, telemanagement, telemedicine, remote maintenance, solve these problems, don't do this. And but it's still, there's a bit of a mental blocker in around that jump from what's out there in other areas. Like, I mean, you've got depots all over the place for all different sorts of things, because it's just that you need to have that. I mean, for God's sakes, a vending machine is a depot to some degree, right? And so, like, how do you have that? It's that leap from what's commonly acknowledged in different industries and applying that to this industry. And what I find interesting is that, like, a lot of the innovation potential in multifamily property management whole is already very vibrant in other verticals.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the buying profile in multifamily is often, hey, do you have, does it work in multifamily? And you could be like, you could have, 1,000 customers in a very adjacent industry, and they would still kind of like, well, we need to see some people in multifamily using it. Did you feel a lot of that? Like, I mean, I realize you targeted multifamily to start, but even like high rise versus low density, like those buyers segregate their decision making differently than they possibly could.
Absolutely. And I think, in y'all's case and ours specifically, multifamily real estate is so accustomed to, we're going to solve whatever we need to solve, certainly on the physically side with the real estate that we have. So even just making that mind shift of, hey, maybe you don't need to, maybe outsourcing is actually the better play, which I think has certainly gained a lot of steam with the whole centralization efforts, and knowing that they don't actually need to sort of solve everything on site, if you will. But also it's, to your point, the last mile has been around forever. Multifamily says, well, whether it's the industry is unique, or an A-class deal versus a C-class deal is unique. And certainly a lot of parts of that argument are true. But in other ways, human behavior is generally consistent across all people, and applying other business models to multifamily, it's just, I think in a lot of ways, it goes back to just risk averse behavior. And if you're a decision maker, either on site or regionally or as a VP, across all levels, the multifamily real estate, the apartment building is going to be there. And so do you really want to take a perceived risk? Or do you want to keep doing it the same way? And, like prop tech theme in general deals with that all the time. And I think especially in both of our businesses, it arguably should not be as big of a leap of faith to do something like this. It's just a business decision, but it's very hard to break the mold of that line of thinking. I think if we've got this building, how are we going to solve it with what we have with this real estate?
Risk is a really interesting kind of double click in terms of like the buyer persona, right? Because you got like a risk perception from a manager, even just if you're selling to managers versus owners, there's two different risk profiles there. In terms of the on risk that you mentioned earlier, on risk and off risk. I think it's interesting to kind of dig in on, if you don't mind digging in a little bit, around like, why is, in your opinion, why is multifamily slow to adopt risk?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to reiterate what I said, but that's the main thing. I'll expand on that because I think it's, especially for people who have been in the industry for a long time, they've seen ups and downs. They know that even, there are certainly exceptions to all of this, but even in bad times, they're still going to have people renting their units, and they're still going to have, profits from those buildings. And so, taking what they perceive as too high of risks. And I think there's definitely a risk, or a mix of personal risk of your job and just risk of, hey, we built this property, it costs $100 million to build. We can be conservative and still make a lot of money. So what's the real upside? ROI of taking a risk? And I think that's why it's a higher bar to achieve for a lot of prop tech companies, especially if it's like a truly new and unique solution. Is because if they're looking at even us versus lockers, they've got to be convinced that it's going to be that much higher of a ROI to take. It's a risk reward equation for sure. And I think that that gap is probably wider in multifamily just because people are going to rent the units arguably no matter what, and they can do better or worse obviously, but they're still going to have the real estate there and make profit. It just depends on how much.
I find it interesting to kind of look at like the 95% occupancy, and then you've got 50% turnover. Like those are just like, that just is a lot of work. That's a lot of work in a single, like in any other business, they'd go, this doesn't even make sense. Like you've got 95% utilization of your assets, amazing. 50% turn of your revenue sources. What is going on?
Right. When I think that juxtaposition makes it much more impressive for what property management companies do and on-site teams do on a daily basis. They're essentially starting fresh with half the building each year. If you thought about it in that lens, in any other business, even this one, like, wow, that's an ongoing challenge, and it is. And I think introducing other variables outside of like the norm of just leasing and operating the building. Like the more unknown variables or perceived unknown variables that you introduce in that, I can easily see why the risk aversion is there.
Yeah.
I think it's having enough of a tech forward mentality and knowing that you have to keep up with competition and keep up with technology to move your company or your building to the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah,
is what's needed. But frankly, I always understand a risk aversion. And it's clearing a higher hurdle, I think, for us. That's the challenge and part of what makes it fun, I think.
Well, I think that to your like the risk conversation is interesting in that, especially getting to the hell yes piece, is like well, we have to have ROI. I don't feel that that's the bar that needs to be hurdled. Like everybody has a positive ROI, otherwise you're not in business. But that's not why people buy. Like that's how they justify the decision to buy, and that's well documented from a psychology perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to kind of like get your take on like what's the what's the emotional risk problem they're trying to solve? Like, is it the fact that or at least, and this could be anecdotal, right? Or maybe just the stories that you're personally familiar with. But like, why do people commit to change on a non-ROI basis? Because like there are people that say this is a no-brainer, right? And there are people that go, well, then they want to double click on every single decimal in the spreadsheet. But like, I can't get the decimal in the spreadsheet conversation unless I've hit the no-brainer, unless I pass the gate of the no-brainer piece. And we got to hit that in the first half an hour, right? And so it's like demonstrating the pain, demonstrating the current alternatives out there, how they're not going to work, they're never going to work, and then here's a path forward. So for you, like, how did you strike that emotional chord? How did you commit to change?
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, it's perhaps an easier answer than most because we can show it so visually too. We know that there's real interest, or I guess in the first 30 minutes of that call, they're going to make it clear, like, is the pain something that is high enough and intolerable enough that I need to solve this either now or in the near term? And if that's a yes, then that's obviously, to your point, a great start. And so I think knowing that the pain is not something that they can handle for the next year, and they're going to need to solve this one way or the other in the next 6-12 months is a big part of it. And in our pitch decks and conversations, it's showing pictures of package rooms and other just boxes scattered everywhere, and even just asking a leading question that we generally always know the answer to of especially these days, but all the time, it's a real struggle to keep good on-site team members. And they hear all the time, especially if there are package problems, like that is not going to be good for you as a regional or property manager to keep those good team members in place if they're having to do their kind of normal job and deal with packages and deal with whatever fallout results from that. Like it's just another thing of a snowball of they want to keep the good people, and dealing with packages is a big part of that. So for us, it within a pitch deck is very visual, and we have like hundreds of just pictures of packages strewn everywhere, and even huge package rooms that boxes are all on the floor, and you're never going to be able to know where it is if you're a resident.
Somewhere in there is like grandma's ashes kind of thing, like something so personal that's sitting underneath of whatever. Do you guys, when you're looking at the package problem, sounds like it can be like an incremental pain. Like this is kind of like the temperature in the water just goes up a degree, every quarter or every 2 months. And so you kind of get acclimatized to the agony of solving through all these things versus realizing that you've got to change. This is not sustainable. How do you find what is usually happening or happened to your buyers when they realize they've got to do something different? Like, is there, and I mean, we talked with Jake around, like, you've got like maybe Thanksgiving or there's seasonal things that happen. Like, is there an obvious thing that you guys can campaign around that says, hey, whatever's happening, have you thought about this? Like, or, or how do you sort for that?
Yeah. I mean, and, one tactically something that happens relatively frequently is that they'll have, either execs at the management company or owner walks through the properties, either just checking on their portfolio or if it's a, property up for sale. And if there's packages, visibly in sight, let alone, some of the worst images, that's going to be a comment from an owner or asset manager. And that has quite a few times been a specific reason why they'll reach out, because, whether it was told to them explicitly or not, they're like, oh, well, they just saw this. They probably don't think that was good. Like, this is a good situation. But past that,
especially that's the ground floor room, right? So you walk in the building, there's the admin office, leasing office, you're walking, and then there's that, that, what's behind that door? Like, ooh.
Yeah, and it almost always is. And that's a great thing to tell, developers, especially on the front end, is you guys are spending millions of dollars on these beautiful leasing offices. And then you have, either this, room on the side or, on higher end deals behind the concierge desk. You just spent $2-5 millions of dollars on just that floor, just that leasing office, just that room. And then you have packages just cluttering everything up. Like, that makes sense. And so that's a great sort of leading question on the new dev side. But then also back to your earlier question, for us, it's easier to show, any prime day is going to be a campaign. Certainly peak season for holidays is the easiest one. That's going to be, a month plus of that same pain. So you certainly key in on those calendar dates too.
And incrementally for you guys, like, to expand in a market, it's just absorption. Like, you have the warehouse space, the infrastructure's there, you're scaled out, ready to rock.
Yeah, I mean, especially now, with 40 warehouses, 25 markets. So in any of those markets, we can add a lot of properties until we have to potentially look at adding a warehouse or expanding a warehouse. And, right now it's just about signing up more communities and filling those up.
And I mentioned this to Jake after the day after, we'll chat with him. Like, have you guys considered much around maintenance supply closets?
Have had some anecdotal conversations, to be honest.
It's the same picture you just talked about,
right?
Like, except for most of the time it's empty. Inventory says that there's 9 toilet seats in there, but there's actually 0.
Yeah, and like generally, these are questions I am asking clients frequently of if it's the theme of what else can we solve for you? That it requires real estate or delivery, really keys into the core competencies that we already have, already making trips to those buildings. So funny enough, you should ask. Maintenance has been one where, we don't want, fridges or dishwashers, anything big, but those high velocity SKUs of, toilet seats, whatever the case may be, that fits pretty well into where we're trying to head, of just kind of stacking additional services and value on top of the sort of rails that we built so far.
Especially when you take a look at like the poor inventory control on those items, the just-in-timeness of the work orders required, and centralization. Like, often people are not going to be going to the site until they are going to the site. Like, they're not at the site, and so like it's going to emerge as a bigger problem. And I think and I don't know if this is a problem you guys would solve, but as service catalogs and maintenance catalogs become part of the way people procure, there's going to be something that needs to happen around how the just-in-time inventory was like, that's a 25-year-old concept, but just-in-time parts could be the analog that also could solve that square footage. I'm just curious. I'd always curious to see, like, all these routes, again, it's porting over the same problem in the same industry, but just to a different function.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, geez, if this guy's coming around all the time to drop off this stuff, why couldn't they drop off our toilet seats too? Because we're anyways, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And certainly like a broad theme of maintenance and your example specifically has been something we're thinking about, because we're already doing like short-term storage, and we're rolling out Fetch Market right now, which is convenience item delivery. And, both of those, in addition to, potentially a maintenance, sort of delivery or maintenance item delivery service. We're taking advantage of the warehouse space we already have.
Yeah.
We're taking advantage of the delivery infrastructure and those relationships with the properties, and just adding on more value with whatever makes sense.
And then from a buyer perspective, is there an amenity fee for using Fetch that passes through to the resident, or does that stay within the property?
They'll typically pass through our fee. Varies somewhat widely, either by group or by geography, but typically they'll either bundle it into an existing amenity fee and perhaps increase the amenity fee on renewal, or I'd say it's maybe 50-50 where there'll be a package delivery fee or something like that gets passed through more explicitly.
Gotcha. We got a question here on risk from Stephen Winsby. Talking about risk in the same context we're talking about. So I two concepts move forward. Risk aversion is a noun. It's a concept or tendency. Risk averse is an adjective, person, or entity. So, just thinking it's the chat around those two things. Yeah, risk aversion is kind of a state of mind, and risk, or is it a tendency to be risk averse? I think it's a combination of both. Like, what's interesting about risk aversion is that it's so context specific. Like, the same person that might not like choose Fetch could be a skydiver. Like, it's just like it's just understanding of your circumstances, and that's a really terrible example. But it's risk it's so contextual.
Yeah, and I mean, I think going back to what we talked about earlier, a risk averse regional manager may only be risk averse in their job. And there's plenty of people in our industry that are more risk averse. I would argue probably the right level of risk averse, to take some chances. Certainly measured risk, but you don't get the outsized sort of returns or reward in your job or at your property if you're not a little bit risk averse. I think business.
Well, it's particularly interesting when you look at a industry that has such high turnover at really almost all levels. Then you're typically going to be a little bit more, well, you're either going to risk on or risk off. I don't know if you float in the middle when you start a new place. Like, you're either there to make a change, or you're there to kind of like, typical 90 days. I'm going to go observe for the first 90 days, and then I'm going to kind of build an action plan, and I'm going to deliver the action plan. But like that risk, it feels a bit binary depending on, after a job change.
Yeah. And I don't know if this would be controversial at all, but I'd almost argue that, the more risk averse people in our industry probably hop around more, and more risk averse, more adverse to risk. Now I'm confusing myself.
Risk off.
Yes. Thank you. Off, you jump around more. And I think risk on, and especially, I'm sure that there are risk on folks that those risks don't pay off, and maybe they want to jump or they're forced to jump, but risk on folks that really make an impact probably move up within those companies versus jump to new ones, if I had to guess, more often than not.
Yeah, it is interesting. I was chatting with Zeke from Funnel at NMHC, and we we're chatting just about propensity to adopt change, and his experience has been around those that have gone to new roles are often at least open to a conversation, because they're looking to at least create some sort of signature for their new role. But it's I think it's still, maybe they're receptive to conversation, but I think the jury's out on whether they're buyers or not, because they may not be able to get the cohort of the buying committee rounded up together to agree to change.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's counter to my point, but it definitely depends on the situation.
Yeah, and the role.
Yeah.
So when you guys are taking a look at, so we kind of status check. So we talked about the buyers are seeking to solve a solution around package delivery, which has an aesthetic to it, has an inconvenience to it, has a fee to it, It's an unknown charge. So they're paying for something they're not able to recover on. Like you mentioned, you're passing through as an amenity fee in some cases, but at least there's something to pass through. Whereas if you've got somebody who's a leasing agent who's sorting boxes, you can't pass that through because it's not something.
Right.
It's an extra. And so you relieve the problem in terms of the staffing being distracted from their core job. You relieve the problem of just like even like custodianship of that package.
Mm-hmm.
Logistics all around that, especially people in and out, solving all those problems. Hell yes buyers look a lot like people that, maybe haven't tried something, but they're kind of running out of gas. And another hell yes buyer would be someone who has tried something, but they've grown out of it. And so they're kind of reluctant to do another capital call for a $75K bunch of storage lockers that is already foreseeably not going to work in 2 years' time. Like it's almost a consumable that looks like a capital event, a capital expense.
Yeah.
So great prospects for you guys. Time wall can be around seasonality. And so like where they just come out of a suffering around, I just ingested all these packages. We didn't do any leases last week because it was Christmas season or Thanksgiving time or Prime Day. We didn't do any leases because our leasing agent and our maintenance tech, our maintenance super, they were sorting through boxes that were coming through every single minute. And then, and with the solutions they've tried it with the people, they've tried it with the storage locker, they tried it with the concierge if it's that kind of property, but it still looks a lot like racks in a closet that are organized and there's someone's stuff. So like that translates to negative Google review. If things get lost and it was signed off at the door, then people get pretty upset about that. And so it's kind of like just what I've heard so far. Mm-hmm. And then get into kind of objections. So I think we spoke a little bit about objections, but maybe not directly. Like what objections do you typically, because this all sounds like no-brainer stuff, but people still say no. We talk about the risk piece of being able to, I'm not authorized to make that decision, but then they say no or not yet. What kind of objections do you guys hear?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easy one off the bat is more so around like they don't feel the pain, acutely enough or strong enough to make a change, whether that's going with lockers or just keep maintaining status quo. In more recent years, just more so, I wouldn't say the sort of fee hesitancy or any of the FTC type stuff, but just with negative rent growth in a lot of these markets, there's certainly been more of a hesitancy to increase any pass-throughs or increase any costs for that matter. And so that's been probably an objection more so in the last couple of years than it was in the previous 4 or 5 from that. I would say it's pretty clear. We've had to clear a higher hurdle of resident perception of the fee. Are they getting the value out of it? Both resident and property perception of this cost that's ultimately going to be built into rent or a fee in some way, most likely. And so, I think that bar has been raised when they're hesitant to pass through anything or increase rent or sort of do anything on that side of things. Then it goes back to they need to be feeling the pain more operationally. So it's, frankly, that's part of the reason why we started to roll out storage and market that are free to the property. They're just available to residents where you solve your package problem, all of the benefits that come with that. But with Fetch Package, you get market, you get storage, and you're increasing the value that you can show to residents, and therefore should lead to resident retention, especially in the last couple of years being a huge focus.
Well, and not to mention it's an arbitrage on like dead real estate, like dead square foot, like low, like very expensive. This we talk about a lot is like you got very expensive things doing low value things. So in the case of a storage locker, it's very expensive square footage doing low value square footage. So the arbitrage opportunity that you guys offer in addition to that is going to give you infinite scalability in your low value thing or job to be done, and at a price that is much more reflective of what that job to be done is, versus like the story used to be in commercial, like server rooms on like 27th floor of an office building. That's just bad. That's a bad way to spend money. Right? And so in this case, you guys are taking that arbitrage opportunity as well and making that available, not to mention all these other things that kind of like you could have it conceivably, you have an infinite square footage that doesn't flow through on the pencil and the underwriting, right?
Right. Absolutely. There's a huge arbitrage component to it from
what you get bikes off decks, that kind of stuff, like bikes off patios, all those kind of things.
Right. And even further that, the real estate that you just freed up by, you don't need packages on site. So you just freed up that real estate that you were using. And so, you can add another net new amenity in addition to what we can offer of, maybe it's a pet wash station or whatever the hot amenity is of the day of podcast studio, whatever the case may be of, those are things that should be on site. And, if you don't need something on site and you can put in something that's more value add that actually should, be where it is on site and take advantage of the more valuable real estate. I think that's a lot of the decisions that go into play in switching to Fetch or, that decision matrix in general.
I would imagine like in some cases it just stays empty, but there's no OpEx associated with an empty space. Like maybe it becomes just like another, I don't know, but like what would it, I mean, I guess, you said the amenity of the day. Usually they're kind of like in weird spots, like they're behind the desk or something like that. But it's like, even at unused, at least you're not paying, like right. You're not losing money on that square footage. It's neutral.
Right. And I think in a lot of cases that I've seen just visiting properties that we've rolled out, they could have finally have room for their, leasing office, like storage closet where it was just kind of scattered about, and finally have room to have things that they actually need in the leasing office, or, in some cases, perhaps even maintenance items that may be a little bit more a stretch, but.
Well, and if you're building, you just don't build it. Right. And that becomes a lobby, which is much nicer.
And absolutely. And we have, a pretty good amount of developer clients that we sign up their pipeline sort of years in advance, and they actually do change the blueprints. And they'll probably still have some sort of closet or, whatever the case may be, but they can, in a lot of cases, actually change the format of their leasing office to something a lot more, either, palatable visually or just more functional because they don't need to allocate, as much space to packages.
Going back to, 8-9 years ago when you guys started up, or maybe people that are coming on right now, what's a piece of advice you'd offer either yourself back then or people that are coming into Fetch as kind of like something to look forward to, a piece of advice in terms of finding those hell yes customers?
Yeah. I mean, I think in there's two things I'd say here, and one might be a little bit obvious, but the amount of time that they're spending, with you and pulling in other members of their team and just, showing how serious they are, I think is probably the one, or maybe initial, sort of indicator, but more so, I think it's, in a first call or second call or whatever the case may be, if you're walking through with them, in our case, like envisioning and laying out the process of here's how it's going to work on the rollout, and here's what it looks like when it's fully ramped and fully, implemented on site, and they're starting to say like, oh yeah, we could do this or that with, with the package room. And, I think seeing whether it's verbally or just kind of a look on their face on a call or in person of like, they've sort of maybe accepted that leap or taken that leap in their own head of like, they're already envisioning what this is going to look like, once the, product or service is implemented, like that, very low odds you're going to lose that deal. And so I think like those are the more of the hell yes crowd, I guess I would say.
So do you call that kind of like vision? Like, so I've heard that expressed as like vision lock, like where you kind of like, you talk about the future, how the future has less pain in it, and it's directly attributable to this decision. You're the hero in the story, kind of bringing back Jake's kind of insights. But like, you're the hero of the story. You made this decision. This is what the future looks like. Let's share that vision together. Is that am I hearing you correctly or that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, that they're already, at least temporarily before they pull the trigger, they're in a state of mind of this is what, life is going to be like with this product or service.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think taking that leap mentally, then you've just got to, kind of get that to completion and bring their current state of mind, or if they start to waffle, it's like trying to bring them back to that picture, that vision that clearly they were, engaged with and interested in doing.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. How can people get a hold of you?
Email's best way, michael@fetchpackage.com. I check my email too often, so I won't ignore most of them. But email michael@fetchpackage.com.
You're better than me. And then who else should we talk to next on the
show? We're based in Austin, so I can't say Dallas specifically now, but based in Dallas, another Dallas founder. I'm not sure you've talked to Rob Whiting at Boom.
I've not talked to Whiting at Boom.
He's a good one.
Boom, are they the kind of like 3D space company?
No, it's resident screening, and
okay.
I'm not going to do them justice, but the credit reporting aspect to that as well. They're growing quickly, and Rob's really impressive. Small scrappy team, and he's still, to my knowledge, does a lot of the founder-led sales. So he'd be a good one to talk to on this topic.
Very cool. I'll reach out to him. Thank you very much. All right, everyone, wrapping up today. Thanks a ton today. That was a really, really good bottom through up, then obviously through your scaling years, tons of stories to share. Really appreciate you guys for just coming fully present to the conversation today. It was wonderful to hear just the grind and then the conversion all throughout, and then the thing that you never planned for that created the inflection point, the response to that, narrowing in on the problems that you solve, and now expanding the problems you guys solve. It's very exciting, super exciting story to hear. Thanks for everyone for listening today. If you're on the podcast on Apple or Spotify, please subscribe or add some comments and rate it. It always adds to everything. Check my LinkedIn or Michael's LinkedIn. We're going to be doing, following on this, there's usually a blog post. There's some quotables and things that come out. We'd love to get your input on that. And if you do want to add feedback or have questions, you're listening to this not live, just add them to the chat and we'll get a notification to it and be able to respond. Thanks everyone for listening today. Michael, thank you so much for your time. This has been very valuable for everyone listening, especially those that are starting something up. Wonderful for your shares. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Right on. And we're good.